That's quite good. Hey guys, it's Adam's voice in post here. I often get complimented on this kind of work that I do, these speed painting backgrounds, on the speed with which I can create them and the fidelity that I can get in terms of the impression that I can get out of them in a very short amount of time. What I thought I would do for this video is let it run at 1x speed, but give a little bit more narration as to what I'm doing and what I'm thinking as I'm working, which I'm not always able to do when I'm just recording the clips. So here I'm basically starting with a series of colors. It's one color ramp, just to keep it nice and simple. Don't add too many colors at the beginning. All I'm doing is blocking in shapes. That's all I'm really thinking about at this point. Finding shapes, kind of like a sculptor would if they were, molding with clay or, chiseling away at some stone. So here I can see some trees and I'm just sort of creating some impression of bunches of leaves, right? Branches, that kind of thing. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Think of it as a little bit of like a Bob Ross kind of approach to just sort of blocking in stuff. And there's no right or wrong, right? Happy accidents. I'm thinking about the silhouette. I'm thinking about the overall shape. So it doesn't really matter that this looks like circles or anything like that. I then switch down to a darker color to create an impression of shade, and it's not something that I commit to, but that's, I think, one of the most important things about this process. You're working with digital ink here. You can always undo if something's not working right, or you can always paint over with no consequences. You guys are figuring it out pretty quick, huh? I like that you're guessing. It's fun. I think when I was at this point, I wanted to create an impression of depth. I wanted to show you sort of this tree line fading off into a vanishing point. And so you can see I'm making the details smaller and smaller. I'm already thinking about the composition. In fact, I'm mostly thinking about the composition at this point. He's doing the hello. That's right, yeah. Correct. I don't often use references when I'm working directly on the canvas, but I do usually have some sort of mood board or collage that I use to sort of give me something, just some sort of prompt. So you could see I had that sort of autumn castle tower thing that I was bringing up from Google, and that motivated the idea of putting a castle here or a tower off in the distance. Yeah, dude. It's so awesome to think about this stuff. Like legends and castles and oh man, let's go. One thing I've been learning a lot of as I've been working with pixel art, and it's kind of not exclusive to pixel art at all. This is something that most digital artists and artists in general would subscribe to, but it's the idea of using fewer colors. Most works, even if they're sort of realistic or have like a lot of detail in them, have a very limited color palette. Even if you watch, movies, Hollywood films, there's generally often a sort of palette that the editors work within to grade basically the colors of the scenes to create a sort of a mood, a general atmosphere. And that has the sort of secondary effect of allowing you to concentrate less on the color harmony at this early stage in the process, if we're talking back about pixel art, and allow you to just focus on forms. Also, detail is something that when we experience an image, And in general, when we look at how people perceive images, we really only have so much capacity to appreciate detail. And often we completely omit details when we think about an image and when we're actually sort of perceiving it. And so having these flatter shapes is a way of sort of representing that and allowing that effect to shine through. So, this castle in the background, it's got details, you would assume if you got really up close to it, but we're not up close to it, so there's no real reason to add too much there. What's more important to me in this process is the spectacle, right? I just want to communicate to you that there is a tower off in the distance, right? And it's up on this cliff edge. The drama of what I'm sort of depicting is more important than the details. And I think that's one of the most important things about doing a kind of background image. It's to set a scene. I think this idea of having the background be in very low detail and using fewer colors in order to serve its purpose of just setting the scene as opposed to doing anything else is really important in video games. Mostly because in a video game context, the foreground is where all the action is going on, and you don't want to pull focus away from the foreground. So it's something that if you've seen the brick tile set that I produced this week, the same week as this background, you know how detailed that is. And since that's in the foreground and it takes focus, it really should be far more detailed than what's going on in the background here. Particularly in the way that I use details that are shaded with colors that also feature in the foreground. Having colors that are the same in the background and the foreground is a really, really fast way of confusing the player because every millisecond that your eye has to spend differentiating between the foreground and the background is time that you're not really able to focus directly on the game content. And ultimately, that's what's important. The job that the background serves is just to set a background. Working with smaller and smaller details, approaching that kind of pixel art border where you're working with a 1 pixel brush, it's kind of fun and it helps preserve the faithfulness of this as a game that is still a pixel art game. Remember, in the first episode of Pixel Art Class, we were talking about how pixel art is art that was constructed using single pixel details. So having those tiny little details in the background helps us kind of approach that. As far as, at the pixel level, not every detail is accounted for, but that looks pretty good, huh? As we approach those really, really small brush sizes, we are still evoking pixel art. Being able to appreciate details at the pixel level is almost the same as having produced them that way. You can see me here trying to experiment with different kinds of ways of marrying this background with the foreground. So here we've got some sort of foreground objects. I've got some kind of like more harsh shading on them here. I'm experimenting just at the shape level. I don't really know what these details are yet. I sort of pick up this idea halfway through shading this thing that I might like for this to be a sort of pathway, and very quickly realize that's not what I want because it pulls too much focus. And this idea of having the background reach into the foreground is very antithetical to the kind of Jump King-esque way of sort of combining or overlaying the game space over the terrain space. You can see here I'm always bringing in the work back to the context that it lives in. So I'm always coming back to this idea of having there be a prototype or a context space that we test our work against. Because if we don't do that, how do we validate it? Maybe I can get away with using just the palette if I do this. Just go whoosh over the whole thing. It's just quite saturated. It makes it hard to see the character. I basically have to give him like a white outline for this to work. I just don't know if I want an outline at all, to be honest. It's too washed out, right? It's too washed out. You can see me here trying to figure out a way of creating a kind of contrast between the foreground and the background, and giving the background the right mood in the context of the game. And that's something that I obviously didn't do at the beginning. I didn't validate these colors. But luckily with this process, Sprite's ability to shift the colors and change them and replace them it's good enough that we don't really need to put that much attention in, right? With 5 button presses, I can completely put this in a very different color space, which is something that you're going to see in a bit. What do I do? G'day, Shook. Could just go for the blue sky. Different feel though, isn't it? Totally different vibe now. But I really like this one. So yeah, you can see how easily we can use the fill tool to just place a completely different color space on the work. And at this point, I sort of had the idea of separating the midground and the background with 2 different colors. I think this was a good idea. It allowed us to add a little bit of extra detail on these trees. At this point, you know, it's all just a matter of creating a space, and this is as much concept work as it is background work. I'm understanding and trying to fill out the space of what the game is in this process. It's very messy, it's very dirty, but I think it's really efficient. I will break the pixel font. You did, you broke it. I just wish I could do something a little more autumny. Maybe we go for the grays. Ooh, maybe we go for the grays. There we go. I think we found it. Ooh. The fog did a good job of justifying that low detail in the background while still setting a really interesting scene. Go one more. And then we could even go for... And here I'm using the shade tool to allow myself to add details in that lightest gray space without encroaching on any of the pixels I've already placed elsewhere. So I'm being really messy with the brush. It's almost like having a second layer without having a second layer. So you can see my palette in the very top there only has 2 colors in it. And I'm just flipping between the lightest color and the second lightest. And so those are the only colors that'll ever get affected by those brush strokes. Super, super handy tool. And it helps you avoid any real confusion with layers. When you're drawing clouds, one of the most important things to do is to think about the depth and perspective. So when people draw perspective, they draw lines like this, right? Hang on. Like that and like that. And then they'll draw like that, right? And that's your horizon. Clouds that are further away, right? If you draw like a bunch of circles, right? A row of circles here, right? They'll all look like circles. But as they fade off into the distance, they're gonna flatten, right? Into like a line. So basically, if your clouds need to be further away, compress them down. Draw like all of your clouds as if they belong to a sheet that's fading down towards the horizon and flattening out. That's how I come up with my clouds. You can see them here. It's like nice big round, and then as they go further, they flatten out. To the point where you could just draw like a couple of ones like that at the very end. They were just flat lines. And it's nice if you want to show depth is in one cloud cluster, you do that, you show that flattening happening. So that's my speed paint. I think it came out really well. This is basically how my process works. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you get something out of it. Happy painting. Hey pal, thanks for watching, and thanks most especially to the patrons and Twitch subs who support this channel and my game dev project Insignia. To find out more, click the links in the description below. And if you like this video, tell YouTube by clicking the like button, and then YouTube will tell me, and then I'll make more videos. That's nice.